In 2007, Amanda Knox was accused of the murder of her housemate while studying abroad in Italy. The story attracted global attention and became a defining moment in Amanda's life. 10 years after being fully exonerated for the murder of Meredith Kercher, Amanda joins us now. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. I have to say, your case was one that absolutely polarised the world. So much attention on it, and all stemmed from what you thought was an innocent trip abroad while you were studying to Italy.
Yeah, and it's a shame because I think that one of the biggest, criticisms of the case is that the truth of what happened to my roommate, Meredith, got lost in all of the scandal around it. And, one of my biggest traumas that I've had to deal with ever since even being acquitted and recognized as innocent is reckoning with the fact that my very identity, who I am, is wrapped up and inextricably linked with the death of my friend. And how do I make sense of that as I continue to be a person in the world?
The case in itself, because I remember at the time, because I was a journalist even covering it from a foreign news aspect, it was so sensationalised. It was almost like a tabloid dream at the time. You're the young, beautiful girl, the romantic partner, all the ingredients of what should be an awful story, but it wasn't a story, it was your life. What was it like living through that? Were you aware of the media circus that was surrounding you globally?
Well, at the time, no. I mean, because I was in prison for much of the time, and so I didn't have access to the grand scope of it all. But I really had to. I mean, I was 20 when this happened, right? I was 20 when I was arrested. And so I really didn't even have a full understanding of the misogyny at play in the trial. Like, I was accused as a woman of a man's crime. A man committed this crime against my roommate. He broke into our house. But it became this, outrageous story of women hating women, which I was completely unprepared for. This idea there are two kinds of women, the whore and the virgin, is the one who's judging the other, and how the idea that women can actually be friends with each other is a lie. And so that was really at play in the trial. And I felt like I was up against a mythology, not just an argumentation in court.
And of course, the effect on you, your family and friends who were hounded by the media that whole time. That must be hugely uncomfortable for them, to say the least.
Yeah, well, and thank you for bringing them up.
While trying to support you.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think one thing that people should really know is that in these wrongful conviction cases, it's not just the person who's in prison on trial who's experiencing trauma. It's that ripple effect, right? It's the families, it's the people who are coming to support. And just as much as I was vilified and slut-shamed, so was my mother, so were my sisters. And so I think we all grew up very quickly over the course of this trial. But, I think one of the things that I write about in this book is it doesn't just end the minute you get out of prison, right? When you've gone past that survival mode, you're fighting to prove your innocence and save your life. My whole family, everything became save Amanda. But as soon as I came home and I thought that I could go back to being an anonymous college student and have my life back, I realized that I was not free. I was still the girl accused of murder, and that I was defined by this worst experience of my life, and I would be forever, from that day forward, having to prove my innocence every single day for the rest of my life, which is an insane amount of pressure for a 25-year-old girl to go through.
Can you remember what happened that day now? In any sort of clarity? Yeah,
I mean, I vividly remember the last time I saw her. I was at home. I was playing guitar. She woke up late because she had stayed out for Halloween. And I mean, I remember that she still had a little bit of makeup on her face. She was dressed as a vampire for Halloween. And so she was doing her laundry. And then, I will never forget her slinging her bag on her shoulder and saying, have a great day. She was going out to meet her British friends. And that was the last time I saw her alive. And, coming home the next day, I was not planning on coming home and discovering a crime scene. I was just coming home to take a shower and change some clothes. My boyfriend, Raffaele, was going to take me out for a romantic weekend. And then, your real life happens. And I think that, one of the big messages that I try to convey now, like looking back on that period, is you never know. You think your life is going to go a certain way. And, I was on this, great romantic Italian adventure. And so was Meredith. And she did everything right. She came home after, her friends walked her home. And suddenly this happened. And I think after the fact, after we have survived our crises, how do we make meaning out of what has happened to us? How do we not become just defined by a traumatic experience, but go on with our life informed? Do
you think it would have accelerated as far as it did, or it would have got to the stage it did, if you weren't a young, attractive woman?
Yeah, I think both
with a young, attractive man. And this was like an almost a seedy story they wanted to sell.
To that end, I think you're right. I do think that a part of why this story proceeded the way it did and became elevated the way it did was the pornographic nature of it.
You were called sex crazed. You were called every name under the sun, orgies and all this sort of stuff. It was absolute madness.
It was madness. And I think that what's so frustrating about it is that that fantasy, that pornographic fantasy, really took over and completely wiped away the truth of what happened to Meredith. And for me, still looking back on that, on how they constructed this idea of this death orgy between me and my boyfriend and this man that we had zero relationship with, who the actual murderer, who had a history of breaking and entering and a history of aggression towards women, who is on trial right now for sexually assaulting another young woman since he got out of prison. Like, the fact that, like, the facts of this case were completely lost in the midst of that story, that narrative of death orgy, women on women crime, like, it just exploded. And I think it's a fascinating social experiment to look back on the history of this and say, what does this say, not just about the individual players, but also all of us? Why did this captivate us?
When we have what happened to you back then and what you're enduring now, and the fact that this has happened to so many women, but over history, women have been vilified all the time. I know you are friends now with Monica Lewinsky, who herself suffered very, very harshly. And you've also had conversations with Lorena Bobbitt, who, despite being a domestic abuse survivor, was also defined by this one moment. You call yourselves the sisterhood of the ill repute.
Yes, yes. One of the things that I talk about in my book is that since coming home, I felt very alienated and like I didn't have a place in the world, and there wasn't really a path forward for me until I came into contact with other wrongly convicted people and also vilified women. And Monica, I had followed Monica, her TED Talk, her Vanity Fair articles, all talking about the judgment that is leveled against women, young women.
22, that's all she was.
She was 22 years old. Of course, she had fallen in love.
The most powerful man in the world.
The most powerful and notably charismatic, like captivating man in the world. And everyone looked to her. And again, it's that same story, women hating women, women breaking up each other's homes, when really it was a man's choice to have a relationship with a very young woman. And she fell in love with him.
You reached out to the prosecutor.
Yes, I did.
To ask him why they were so dogged in their pursuit of you particularly. What did he say?
Well, he said a lot of things because, when I originally reached out to him, I wanted him to recognize me as a human being. I really felt like the adversarial system that we sort of emerged and encountered each other really put him in a position to not recognize my humanity, to really just view me as a monster and only see fault in me. And I really hoped that if he were to encounter me in real life, like person to person, he would recognize that I'm not the person that he thought he was prosecuting. But then the pandemic happened. And so a in-person encounter wasn't possible. And then I spent 2 years corresponding with him. And I went out of my way, I really realized that if I was going to approach him and actually get some answers, I couldn't do it from this stance of adversarial nature. Like, I couldn't just say, hey, Dr. Giuliana Mignini, why? Like, why would you do this to me? Instead, I tried to think, okay, how can I find common ground with this man? What is it that we have in common that can establish some kind of rapport.
Ground?
Well, sure. I think that because of the huge nature, international media nature of this case, he felt misrepresented by the media too. And so I told him, look, I think we've never really had a chance to get to know each other. I think we also have had like media amplification issues in our case, and I don't want to understand you as a caricature. You're not some boogeyman. I really do think that you were a person who thought you were doing the right thing. Talk to me about that. Tell me who you are. And he was shocked that I would want to get to know him as a human being, and I think was deeply moved. And over the course of this correspondence, we were able to discuss the case, but also things outside of the case. And what was so interesting is whenever we talked about the case, he would always take this sort of defensive stance, because I think that he feels like he's not just representing himself as a prosecutor, he's a representative of the Italian justice system. So he becomes very defensive. But when we talk about things that are not about the case, suddenly I get a window into his view that shows that he has had an evolution of his understanding. To give you an example, I talk about in the book, he asked me to watch this film called Una vita in gioco, A Life on the Line, where a detective realizes that a person he had convicted was actually innocent. And it's like,
What do you do?
You know,
Yeah.
why would he have shared that? You know, you have to sort of read between the lines. And he was always saying to me things like, you're a smart girl, Amanda. What do you know, what am I saying, you know, without saying it? And then, of course, my mom would have this response when I would share with her. She would say, too little, too late, it's not good enough.
Of course, from your own life, trying to shed the whole foxy, noxy persona and I hate saying it out loud, but and trying to get back into everyday life, having work, having a family. How was that for you, and what does your life look like now?
I mean, I think a really huge thing, I think I'm one of the most lucky people in the world. One, I'm alive today. Two, I got out of prison after 4 years instead of 40. And one huge factor in my life that I'm really lucky about is I met someone, my husband, who has been an incredible support system for me. I probably wouldn't be here right now. Well, I met because he's a novelist. Speaking of literary lives, I reviewed his debut novel, War of the Encyclopedists, and I met him. It was very shortly after I was definitively exonerated. And we just had a sort of instant connection on like a friendship literary level. And I don't know, he did not Google me. He did not, you know, he
just met you as a person.
He's met me. For him, I was just Amanda. Yeah. And it was one of the first times in my life where I thought, oh my God, can I be just Amanda again?
And you're embarking on a book tour now, which must be exhausting, because you have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, you told me. How do you do it? How do you do it all?
I had a cappuccino before coming on. They're back at home with my mom, but they have been traveling with me. And I'm so grateful that they get to also have an opportunity to see me really embracing life, because you know, one of the I think that as parents, we don't tell them how to live life. And what I want my daughter to understand is that bad things happen to us in life, but they don't define us. They just inform us, and they give us an opportunity to then go back into the world with what we've learned as stronger for it. And so I feel very confident that I can pass that message along to my daughter.
Amanda Knox, thank you so much for joining us on the show this morning. And Amanda's book, Free, My Search for Meaning, is available now. We'll take a short break. See you back here in 3.